Hi, I'm Alex,
I'm Val.
and we are going to talk about Sopranos, Season 6A, Episode 8.
Why did they decide to
Cakes.
do it 6A and 6B rather than Season 6 and Season 7?
That's a good question.
Like, this is just a normally length season, basically.
Okay, just a side note, it's very hot where we are. And so we may get some questions from Val that we might not normally get. Why is it like this? I don't have answers. I don't know. I mean, I guess it's like a final season. It's like they're kind of combined in the way that they conclude the series on the whole. I'm not sure why I guess the release schedule in terms of like when they actually came out and having the distance between them compared to the distance between other seasons on the whole. I suppose that's it. I mean, I guess like some of the storylines kind of continue from 6A to 6B and they kind of conclude what they've been building. So, I mean, I guess that's kind of how I see it. But we're watching Johnny Cakes. Maybe my favorite title of an episode.
Me too.
And it's great. It's great. I'm just finding 6A is actually better than I remembered.
Me too.
One thing that I wanted to talk about right off the bat, because I was noticing a lot of it near the beginning of the episode, was the connection through editing and content and ideas between Tony and Vito.
And AJ.
And AJ, for sure. But for me, there's kind of this idea of, and we've been talking about this season, but the season getting started off with Kevin Finnerty and Tony's questions of identity and kind of Tony searching for what he kind of needs in his life and what life means to him. And then ultimately these other characters are dealing with other questions and it kind of affects them differently. So I just thought it was interesting, these connections that are made between Tony and Vito, which we've already been talking about in previous episodes. Very much at the beginning, we have Tony kind of with Carmela in bed in this kind of like romantic act of sex.
Did you find it
the
romantic?
romantic act of having sex.
Yeah.
So he's asked if he's okay about the incision, right?
Yeah.
And then there's an edit right away to Vito reading Ab Attack, which is kind of like where his incision is. And then there's actually a cut back from Vito to Tony in bed with Carmela. Mm-hmm. There's kind of like an edit back and forth. And that started getting me thinking about that. And then noticing throughout the episode how much Vito and Tony are edited between each other. Mm-hmm. Most of the time when we see Vito, it's edited to and from a shot and a scene with Tony. But for me, there's something about Tony kind of in bed with Carmela, kind of like having what he wants compared to Vito coming out with his, like, as a homosexual and not having what he wants, or perhaps like he did have what he wanted, but it was a lie, and there's kind of an exploration of that going on. But he has to run away. Like, he can't have that in his life. And I suppose he's kind of exploring right now for himself ways that he could, he could have that. I think it's important to comment on really just how hot it is and that we can't have air conditioner on as we record, because as we look at our notes, I think it's indicative of our headspace as I see my next note, which says, Vito watching Johnny Cakes, I've got a kid, in quotation marks. And I'm not quite sure what that means, but that's okay. Apparently Val has a lot of notes that say Jamba Juice. So
Hot.
we're doing our best in the summer months, but
Oh, God.
it is hot. But something that I've got a kid, I'm not sure exactly what.
No, there was a lot of emphasis on kids.
There's a
this
lot of
episode.
emphasis on kids, especially around Vito. I don't know why Johnny Cakes said, I've got a kid. But that's okay.
He didn't, but you saw that he does have a kid.
We saw that he has a kid.
That's what the scene was saying.
It's not a direct quote.
Yeah.
It's not a Johnny Cakes quote.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, we have Vito in this environment where Johnny has a kid, and then there's actually another edit to Tony and AJ on the boat.
Yeah.
And I think that there is this kind of idea that we've investigated a lot throughout the show of generations and what parents pass on to the next generation, and that's definitely a huge part of this episode with AJ. It's interesting how there's this cut from Johnny Cakes I just call him Johnny Cakes. His name's actually Jim, but that's fine. I'll just call him Johnny Cakes.
Yeah.
I think everybody kind of calls him Johnny Cakes, but maybe it's just me.
Maybe it's just us. Yeah.
I call him Johnny Cakes.
Me too.
Who's kind of like an idealized man. Like he comes across in kind of like a very kind of like stylized, perfect way.
He's got that mustache.
He's this hog. He doesn't fight unfair.
He's got muscles.
Wow, everything. He's perfect.
He saves children from houses.
It's amazing. But so we have this cut to Tony and AJ, and this is kind of like this is the first scene I think where we have Tony and AJ as father and son in this episode. And we have them on the boat, and the first thing Tony says is, want another beer, which it's actually told to us in this episode that AJ's underage.
Yeah.
So, you have that decision, which is fine, but that's how it's set up. And then it goes to them just kind of burping. And then AJ obviously concerned about Junior and the fact that he shot Tony, and Tony kind of brushing it off. And obviously that kind of boiling under throughout the episode.
I think boiling over.
It's very hot, boiling over under, as it has been boiling for many episodes. And then there's even more, like Vito walking down the street of the town, seeing people. And it's interesting how this town is kind of stylized throughout as actually kind of this like strange, almost like paradise where there are a lot of gay men kind of showing up in the environment that Vito's seeing that kind of creates an environment for him. I don't know. In some ways, it does kind of remind me of the Kevin Finnerty thing, and we've talked about that. Mm-hmm. That it is kind of like so stylized for him. There's something like kind of fantastical about it. Mm-hmm. But we have him walking down the street of the town and interacting with people, and then there's actually a cut again to two girls walking down the street in front of Satriale's. Mm-hmm. Satriale's, I can't do it, but and Tony kind of checking them out too.
Yeah.
So, which I thought was interesting. There's also, for Tony, there's a lot throughout this episode of his relationship with women. He actually, in the end, doesn't engage with Juliana Skiff, Ms. Skiff. But there's also a lot of scenes where he's at Bada Bing. He's kind of like eyeing women. There's this kind of relationship where that's always kind of there, where he's kind of like checking people out.
Yeah.
So the sexual identity for me is kind of like the key thing there, that like Tony is constantly able to kind of act on whatever sexual impulses he has, and Vito can't. And there's just a lot of connection between those two characters. Even the idea of like being a father. Like Vito has this conversation with his kids.
Yeah.
In fact, in that shot where he's talking to his kids, in the background we have parents pushing their kids on swings, and then a kind of like swinging shot where now we see an empty swing.
Around, yeah.
And Vito barely spends any time talking to his kid. But it's another example of something that Tony has that Vito doesn't. And there's kind of that contrast and the constant back and forth between those two characters and their stories within this episode are kind of pushing those off against each other. And for me, like, one of the main ideas of this episode surrounds kind of around that line that Tony has, where he says, if you have the chance to do something that makes you happy, you should take it. Which is something he says that is his kind of like near-death experience has brought out in him. It's this kind of new philosophy that he has. Well, I think it's really interesting because even if Tony is acting on that, it doesn't apply to anybody else. And I think that's one of the main ideas of this episode, is that Tony can kind of get what he wants. He's in this position of power, and he lives in a world where he has the chance to do something that makes him happy. Often it makes other people very unhappy. I mean, think about selling out the business of this person, even the way that affects Patsy Parisi, that affects his family. Throughout the show, there's infinite examples of Tony doing things that make him happy and make other people that we know unhappy.
The non-Tonys.
But Vito, it makes him happy. Like his identity is that he's actually gay, and he can't act on that. If that made him happy, if he can't be truthful about that within his circle, within his life that he existed in otherwise, because people can't accept it. People want to kill him for it right now. So the reality of that is that he really shouldn't be engaging with the things that make him happy. AJ, I'm not exactly sure what makes him happy.
We'll
but
talk about AJ after. Maybe.
But I think he's another example of somebody who he can't really just do whatever he wants. Carmela's another character. She can't do whatever she wants. Frankly, everybody can't do that. But Tony is in this kind of rarefied position where he sort of can. And I think that that's an important contrast to always kind of be aware of. And also to kind of keep in mind throughout the last season in terms of where Tony ends up, who he ends up being, like what kind of person he is, and what's his relationship to that idea of, does he know the impact that he has on other people? Does he know what kind of a person he is, what he puts out in the world, what the impact of his actions are? I think that's something that's really important to think about.
Yeah.
Because he can repress it, and it's possible for him to kind of push it down and not confront it. But at the same time, I think there's a bit of like a psychological awakening to watch for in the last part of the show.
Yeah, but I mean, we have two, like, I'll talk probably about both of them, but one of them is related. There's two scenes in this episode that I think are, like, super key scenes. One of them being actually Melfi's session with Kupferberg, where she talks about Tony, and she says, nothing's really changed. I think it's just a matter of time before he totally decompensates.
Yeah.
And then Kupferberg's asking her, like, do you think this is this, like, omerta? Like, that's why?
Right.
And she's like, no, it's not. It's something else.
Right.
Right? And I think that is, again, like, as we go forward with the rest of this season and with 6B, I think that's just, like, a really key thing for Tony, because it's not just something about, like, the life that Tony leads and, like, his relationship with the mob. It's something very deep inside him that is really broken. That's really fucked up.
Yeah.
And so I think that scene is really key.
Absolutely. And I think that that's something that gets reinvestigated as the show continues from here. I think that that is kind of opening up.
Yeah, but I like, it's just a matter of time before he totally decompensates.
Right. Right. And that's actually
and we see that with Carmela, right? Like, we see that, like, you know, he kind of investigates this relationship with Juliana. He, like, you know, then he says, you know, he goes into it and then he changes his mind, right? Like, he is trying to do something different, right?
Yeah.
He is thinking about what he said to Melfi, like, after Carmela took care of me, I could never do that, blah, blah, blah. But it's
almost confrontationally.
It's very confrontationally, but it is, like, it's only a matter of time. Versus with Vito, like, he probably says some of the most honest things that we hear in this whole show when he says to Johnny Cakes, when he's like, you know, you spend so much time hiding something that it's really hard. I should have written that down, what he says to him, but, like, you spend so much time, like, trying to hide from something that you don't know when it's safe and you don't know when you can actually come out with your true identity, right? So, like, he's actually, like, doing the work to truly try to change, right? He's like confronting these things that are making it hard for him to live his honest life or whatever, right? Like, you know, and again, there's lots of things that are holding him back from that, but he's actually, like, acknowledging those things, right? I don't, like, you know, compare, it's interesting. I also find it interesting for, you know, Vito versus Tony, and it involves Christopher as well, that Vito does choose to, like, have this persona as a writer while he's in this town. And there's a lot of, like, meta writing about writers in this show at times.
Right.
And I think, you know, kind of like what it would mean for Vito to be a writer, to live this life, right? To be like those people who were sitting in the B&B living room talking about, you know, where to go to see the best covered bridges. And it was funny that we were talking about bridges, actually. I wrote that down, but because we like bridges
very
as a
different
symbol.
Bridges than
different kinds of
bridges of New
covered
Jersey.
Bridges, yeah. But yeah, like, what, like, you know, what does this really look like for Vito? Is it only also for him just a matter of time before this scenario totally decompensates? I also found it interesting, like, when he does call Marie, is that his wife's name?
I think so, yeah.
She's like, we'll get you psychiatric help. Like,
Right.
we all love you. Like, Phil,
The church.
Phil's going to help you.
Cure it.
To really like squash this part of his identity down. And he's, he's making a different choice. He knows that that's not really the case, that Phil's going to be like, yeah, it's all fine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I don't know. Anyways, it's just like an interesting exploration in this episode for me, for Vito, and for characters who are trying to like live their truth or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it, I think. What about AJ? I think that's a really pivotal part of the end of the show on the whole, and I think that he's really kind of coming out as one of the key players at this point.
It's sad. Like I get sad for AJ in this episode. Particularly when he's selling his drums for some reason. Like I know it's like, I don't know.
That really gets you?
It gets me for some reason because like Carmela and Tony, they wake up and they like hear him.
Yeah.
They think they hear him practicing, and they like see this as like, oh, like AJ, like he's back to practicing drums.
Yeah.
And then we find out he's really just selling them for money to be able to like pay for his friends.
One bottle of Cristal.
Yeah, buy all the Cristal.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it just makes me really sad because it is like Tony says I mentioned there were two key scenes for me in this episode. The other one is the scene between Tony and AJ when Tony picks up AJ.
Absolutely.
At the police station, and maybe we'll get to that. But he does say in that scene, like, you've got to grow up. And so it is this kind of like symbol of this kind of innocence that he could just be a kid who plays, practices drums in his room and go to college and do all these things. Like, he needs to make a choice. Like, who are you going to be, AJ?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think
Tony thinks he's a nice guy, and I think Tony does see this potential in AJ,
right?
That I don't know if AJ sees for himself or not.
Right,
but,
probably not. I mean, AJ seems pretty aimless.
Yeah.
But I think it's easy to discredit AJ as aimless and annoying and kind of a brat, which he is. But at the same time, I think he's very important because the show is constantly dealing with questions of identity, generations, if your identity is inescapable. And as AJ gets older, there's this important relationship between father and son that we've investigated between Tony and his dad, and other different generations.
Well, even like Vito and little Vito this episode, right? Like what that means for him.
Yeah. And, we have now AJ kind of coming into his own as an adult and facing these questions of who he is, what issues will he face, what's his psychology. And so the fact that he's getting panic attacks at this point is very significant. And there's an extension of Tony in AJ that I think is very important, because there is a lot of focus on what is passed down between Soprano men. I think it's a different question than what is passed down from Tony to Meadow. There's a lot of investigation, particularly at the beginning of the show, from Tony from Livia, from his mother. But there's also a deep exploration of what it means for Tony to come from the mob, to inherit things from his father's way of life.
Well, it was never the difference between Meadow and AJ is that it was never like an option. I mean, I guess we have, what's her name? The female boss in New York who got out of jail.
The female boss in New York? Oh, right. Yeah. Her. Anyway.
Her. Yeah.
Too hot. I know, but it's too hot. Too hot.
But it was never like a reality for Meadow to follow in any kind of footsteps of Tony, right? Like there was never like I guess like she could have followed in her mom's footsteps and been a mob wife, and she didn't choose that.
Yeah.
I mean, kind of. But, there was never really that, like, I don't know, the family business kind of thing for Meadow, right? She always kind of had this out for being a woman. But there is this thing that ties the male characters very closely to that. And we see that with AJ trying to, like, feeling like this is a part of his identity, which it is, but not really being able to act on it.
Yeah.
And, obviously not really considering what's in his best interest, or realizing that there are other things out there that he could do. Like, they keep talking about event planning. He's like, I don't even know what that is, right? Like, he knows about clubs. He knows about
Right.
You know, he doesn't know anything else. He hasn't been exposed to anything
He knows about
else.
knife fighting.
He knows about knife fighting.
According to my completely excellent notes from today, one of my favorite notes is AJ-club.
Right. He wants to own
So
a
that's
club.
a deep exploration of AJ as a
That
character.
really is.
AJ goes to club.
Yeah.
Um,
But it is like that scene, so we see him try to stab Junior. Well, not even try to stab Junior. We see
Not
him,
even. He doesn't even get that far. He shows up.
He drops the knife. And, we see that scene between Tony and AJ, which I just love the way the scene is filmed also when they're outside. And it's just like so close to both their faces. And we really do see Tony get very emotional about this, right? Like he's like, it's not in your nature, you're a good guy.
Yeah.
And and AJ's interpretation of like Tony liking the scene from The Godfather, right? And Tony's like, it's just a movie.
Yeah. He also says, "You make me want to cry," which is interesting because
'cause
before he says,
in the
"Stop
other
crying."
important, but also in the scene with Melfi and Cooperberg, she comments how he hasn't cried about this.
Right. Well, Tony
about
doesn't
the
really
stuff with
cry.
Tony, but the stuff with Junior, right?
And that's all. Exactly right. And that's also a difference between Tony and AJ. Like in that generation that has passed, AJ now has a different relationship to his feelings and is also like less repressed than Tony is. Mm-hmm. And the fact that he does cry and Tony instructs him not to, and that he makes him want to cry but he doesn't, is significant and also differentiates those two characters. For me, there's a few things around that. I mean, obviously, AJ with the panic attack.
Yeah, then later
is dealing with some significant psychological issues of his own that have been inherited from. Well, they haven't been. I mean, that exist in the same way that they do for Tony, but he has his own independent psychological reasons.
Yeah, but it's tied. I mean, it's tied to that pressure to be a soprano, right? Like when he is at the club, everyone's like, "Oh, soprano! Like, can you get your dad to do this? Oh, like." Get him to invest in this energy juice.
Yeah. I mean, he has no identity. And I mean, even
apart from being a
soprano,
the son of Tony Soprano. Yeah.
And I mean, even when he has the panic attack, there's actually like this focus on water, which is interesting, and interesting to think about water around AJ in the end of the show going forward. But there's this water that he pours, and then it zooms up. Or kind of just moves up, and then we have AJ looking at himself in the mirror, and it's at that point when he sees himself that he has the panic attack.
And we've seen Tony do that a lot of times too.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's that key issue of being uncomfortable with yourself and being uncomfortable with what you see that's reflected back at you. And when AJ sees himself, he has his own psychological issues that are resulting in panic attacks at this point.
Maybe it's just seeing that hideous jean jacket that he bought.
I thought that looked kind of cool. That's not cool?
I don't think so.
I thought that was a pretty sweet jacket. No, not good?
No, not sweet.
No bueno?
Not sweet.
No es bueno. Okay. I thought it was interesting, too, talking about generations. Even like the small amount of dialogue that we get from Junior as he's in the home, it being, "How come I get no mail?" And then this guy saying to him, "Maybe you should start a correspondence," and then Junior kind of being upset with him. There's also like kind of like a lack of responsibility for Junior's state with social relationships, and like a lack of awareness that he is responsible for the lack of closeness that he has to other people. And I think that all the Soprano characters, that's a strong similarity, that there's no responsibility taken. And that's something that AJ's constantly being harped on for, is not taking responsibility. But we can see it show up, certainly with Tony, obviously with Junior in the one scene that he has.
Yeah.
We can see it manifesting in AJ. And I thought that was an interesting thing. Because, I mean, AJ is clearly not taking responsibility either for where he is in his life right now.
No.
And
I don't know where AJ wants to go with his life though. Like really, it's like it's really hard to see that. Like he's like there are I don't know how to say it. Like he's a brat and he he doesn't take responsibility for himself for sure. But at the same time, like I said, like his life. Like, he hasn't been exposed to these other things that he could possibly do, and he hasn't really been given those opportunities
Yeah.
to be anything but what he is right now. You know, I don't know. I don't know. So I feel for him. I also feel for Junior. Like when AJ does come in and he stands up, he's like, my nephew, you know, like AJ.
Which it
and
isn't
like,
his nephew, right?
well, kind of.
Well, it's his great nephew, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I mean, that's also like indicative of Junior's mental state for me.
Yeah, I don't know. I would still think it would like be your nephew. It was. I mean, but it does relate to when that girl was giving AJ a massage and being like your grandfather, and AJ was like, it's my great uncle. So,
right.
You know.
Yeah. But does that mean that Junior thought that it was Tony?
No, he says. Oh, you're right.
know
He
what I
says
mean?
Anthony.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, it's interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. I didn't think about
and
that.
it's even that like a representation of somebody
Yeah,
else,
poor
of his
Junior.
father. Yeah. Poor everybody.
Yeah.
This sucks to be anybody in this
Yeah,
show.
poor you.
Poor you.
Yeah.
It's interesting too, this like Tony asking for practical advice from Melfi about parenting.
Mm-hmm.
She's saying don't undercut each other. And then shortly after that, there's this edit to Carmela giving him money for a suit.
Yeah.
Which clearly he's not going to use it for. But it's interesting because...
He got that sweet jean jacket.
Yeah, well, that maybe. We don't know.
I think so. I think that was implied.
Okay, sweet. Well, I like that jean jacket. But for me, there's also like the connection between those two scenes, this don't undercut each other. The fact that Carmela is kind of giving him money, clearly not understanding what he's going to use it for. Like, that's obviously not the right thing that he needs right now. That's just kind of playing into making things worse and making him more of a brat and more entitled. And I think that, if anything, the two of them are going to come together on that page, because that's what they've always done. There isn't going to be any real discipline or help that pushes him in a direction that he actually needs and is insightful and you know and full of kind of listening to what he actually needs, even though that's difficult. But I think that if anything they're gonna come together on, it's basically just the easy out of giving him money, because that's all they know.
Yeah.
And that's probably the worst thing that they could possibly do.
Yeah.
I mean, this idea, even Tony saying like, maybe we should get him a club, and Carmel's like, he's not even a legal drinking
that was
age.
funny. Yeah, he's underage.
Yeah. I think one of the other big things that's presented in this episode is
the
this,
like corporate.
Exactly. Yeah, it's over for the little guy.
Yeah. Gentrification.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And so we have Caputo's eggs. You know, Tony's kind of protecting it, talking about, you know, how they're so much better, and you know, protecting how the identity of that neighborhood that he's known for so long and how it's getting taken over by corporate America.
You don't want any Old Navy or Bed Bath and whatever there.
Right. And we have Patsy Parisi, you know, kind of going around. And
I love that scene where they can't get the Seattle Coffee Company guy.
It's great.
It's so great.
It's almost like it's like an expansion of the scene we have near the beginning of the show on the whole of Polly going into the coffee store and talking about how they've stolen Italian ideas.
Yeah, but it's even gone. It's even kind of gone further, right?
It's like a further examination.
Yeah. And I love that when Patsy says it's over for the little guy, because it's like, are they the little guy? Like, is that what he's, you know, like, are they saying like that their business is over? We do kind of see that by the end, right? Where Tony does sell this building.
I mean, interestingly, like maybe Patsy is the little guy, because I mean, Tony's doing great.
Totally.
But he's at the top of that pyramid. So he isn't the little guy, but everybody else is kind of getting screwed.
Yeah.
They also obviously, in a broader sense, like their business can't operate the same way, because they can't make money off of these people that aren't conglomerated, like that don't have that kind of strength in numbers or, you know, strength in size. But yeah, it's interesting too to think about the identity of the world that they live in, and how Tony is willing to protect that up front, but he's willing to drop it very quickly for not that much. In fact, it's not even really for money necessarily that he's willing to drop it. It's actually for other things. It's almost more out of spite.
Yeah.
I think, like, he says yes after he sees the old woman who told Tony to pass on her regards to Junior. Mm-hmm. So it's almost more like revenge on Junior based on old people. Yeah, it's kind of messed up.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's the sexual dimension too, that he wants, you know, to be with this woman. And then that gets complicated later on by the fact that he doesn't. But the other key scene for me is after he doesn't and he goes back, and we have Carmela up on the second floor of the house looking down on him. There's a clear parallel to, I believe it's when Tony decides not to kill the soccer coach.
Right.
Going way back when Artie kind of convinces him, and he comes back and he's very drunk, and he's kind of storming around the first floor saying, "I didn't do it." There's similar angles, similar environment. We're looking down at Tony, except now Tony's just kind of full of anger.
Yeah.
As opposed to taking it out on himself through alcohol. But there's this something that, like, he doesn't act in the way that he...
Like his instinct.
leads him to.
Yeah.
He doesn't act in these, like, kind of primalistic ways that just benefit him immediately.
Yeah.
That play into that, if I want something, I'll take it. And at first we see him taking it out on himself, by getting drunk and kind of, just kind of falling around, being disoriented. And now we see him just full of rage about smoked turkey.
I love when Carmela's like, "What the fuck did I do?" Like, it was like, Jesus.
But it's interesting to see when Tony can't have what he wants, how he reacts.
Yeah, totally.
And to think about how it's taken out, and to think about if that's sustainable for him, if he really is changing, if he can become somebody who doesn't act in these kind of primal
like
ways.
Melfi says, nothing's really changed. It's just
Yeah.
a matter of time before he totally decompensates.
That's nice.
Yeah, it's not really like a good sign for Melfi's efficacy as a therapist.
Right.
But could anyone be effective with Tony?
Well, I think that's a question that's examined
Like, could anything
at the end of the
change
show.
Tony? Could different parents have changed AJ? I don't know. Like, again, it's all these kind of like what ifs. Could
Yeah.
Vito live in? I forgot the name of the town.
I don't think it's a real town.
Strats something.
It's fine.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
It's not a real town.
Too hot.
Yeah, too hot to think.
Regardless, I think that's what I have on this episode.
Okay, yeah.
What about you?
I think that's what I have too. I did really like the old people sitting around in the B&B.
Yeah, it's
and how
great.
obnoxious.
I love the phone that gets stolen.
Yeah,
Great scene.
no, but like just how obnoxious they come across.
Right.
Which is really great. Yeah, I'm too hot, so
Anything
we need
else?
to turn
Anything you're mad at?
Anything I'm mad about?
Anything you want to channel your rage into?
Not today.
Okay.
Not today.
All right. Well, thank you for listening. We appreciate it. We'll be back soon, continuing season 6A. We're actually getting to the end, which is exciting.
I know.
And then we'll be going and launching into 6B, which is a highlight of
Again.
television history.
Or / season 7, but it's a short season. I don't know.
Season 7, nobody knows.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.